Good evening, friends. Glad to see you today. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the new podcast, Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. Topics include sexual addiction, religious abuse, religious disenfranchisement, and other types of addictions. This live platform offers counseling sessions, meaningful question and answer, and a counseling continuum. The team includes Personnel Director Lita Williams, LPN, Linda Holmes, Technical Director, Miss Tennille, our visiting cast class, Larry Brown and Ray Edwards. And I'm Prince, licensed counselor and founder of Antioch Youth Center, 501c retired. Friends, the views and opinions expressed on the podcast do not necessarily reflect the goals of the Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches staff. So be advised, these topics can be sensitive and may demand some listener viewer discretion. But let me be clear, our focus is to implement three things: forgiveness, reconciliation, and healing. Thanks for joining us in this process. We can all do our part to enjoy those blessings of God. We want to introduce our guests tonight, and our first guest, of course, as always, is our viewing audience, listening audience. Please join in with your chat, questions, or comments. You can do that by going to YouTube and type in Church of God in Macon, Georgia. You'll see live number 15. Our special guest also is Thomas J. Russell. He's a Church of God child, president of King Priest. It's a nonprofit 501c program. He's a husband, father, minister, business owner, and property mogul. Mr. Russell, if listeners want to connect with you, your off-topic questions, or to follow you, what is your connection and your information for contact, please?
They can connect with me at Thomas J. Russell at yahoo.com. That's one of the ways they can contact me. Or they can contact me at Russell Mobile Roadside at gmail.com. Russell Mobile Roadside at gmail.com.
Side note, you mentioned last week about your food program. Bring us up to snuff on what's going on with that, please.
Oh, yeah. What we do is on every Tuesday, we give out food to the Middle Georgia area. We try to feed at least close to 1,000 families. We have trucks come in. And so what we do is I partner with Smith Street Baptist Church here in 340 Reed Street, Macon, Georgia. And what we do over at my establishment at 4530 Columbus Road is we pass out boxes. We try to hit the different communities. Also with St. Peter's Baptist Church on the east side of Macon. Then on the south side of Macon, that's where Smith Street and my business over at Russell Roadside, that's what we do it in West Macon. So we try to hit different locations and feed the community.
Friends, tonight we're discussing Church of God children. And in some cases, we have a lost generation. Statistics indicate in England, they polled 43% of older adults. And just about half of those who they polled, 43%, were attending church services. They polled the younger people, and out of every 100, only one was going to church. So the grandpersons, the grand folks, they were going to church, almost half. But the younger generation, 1 out of 100. And in fact, I have a magazine right here. When I was a young man, back in the 50s, we had a crowded place, hundreds of young people, seemingly. I mean, just groups and groups. And you go back there today, there may be 20. So in some cases, man, we have a lost generation. We want to reach those. Some are upset with what went on, other reasons. I want to discuss one of those reasons today of how we can reach those young folks and bring them back into the fold. Amen. Some of the young people have gotten hurt because of their parents trusting God for their bodies, and they passed on. And they can't quite understand how that all works, but they got upset when mom died anyway. So, Mr. Russell, first question to you. Your mom was a saint of God for many years. Mm-hmm. Did her stand on divine healing affect you when she passed?
Yes, it affected me, but I think it affected me in a more positive way. Um, it definitely, when you have a parent who believe in divine healing, you have a different perspective, and as far as how they die and how you view it. So yes, it had a big impact on me.
If you're talking to a young person now and their parent did die, what would be your advice to them? You've been through it. If they're hurting, disenfranchised because of their mom or dad passed, what is your advice to that young person?
Pastor Moon, my advice to that young person is a faith thing. Um, just being honest with you, the impact that it had on me was a lot different. And what the advice I give people is to I got to give them spiritual advice as far as drawing nigh to God, because a lot of young people have been not damaged so much on their parents dying, believing in divine healing, but it was the lifestyle that their parent lived while they was living. A lot of parents did not even have enough strength to even believe God for a headache. They might have talked about believing God, but when you live a lifestyle, not so we get that no, a lot of time we didn't take medicine and we didn't do things like that, but it simply comes down to, do you let your children talk about the church people? So do you stop your, like, if my mother was the type of parent, if we was discussing somebody, one of the saints, she said, "Oh no, we're not doing that here." So yeah, it's gonna have a great effect on you. So if you live a lifestyle where you can't even mention the saints and the saints was automatically right, then those parents who allow their children to talk about saints, then they're gonna have you didn't live a lifestyle of divine healing. You just believed it. You just knew about it, but to live it, it means stop your children from talking about saints. Not just coming to church, but living a life when people talking about you, they got to see that. So a lot of children that don't see that, then now that their parents are sick, of course they're gonna have a problem with divine healing because they didn't live the lifestyle. So for
Thank you.
me, it had a positive impact because my mother lived the lifestyle, and all she talked about is going to glory. So I want her to be there.
Thank you. Well said. What would you tell children to prepare themselves for their parents passing? What would you, how can they get their mind wrapped around that? We know it's a shock when it occurs, but what would you tell children to prepare themselves for that moment of that time?
As far as death, there is. I'll be honest with you, Pastor. I tried to look many different ways to find it, but even with my mother dying over 17 years ago, it still feel like yesterday. There is no preparing for it. You just got to know. For me, it was that I knew how my mother lived. I knew the lifestyle she lived all the way up. I was there the very week she died, and for me, preparing for me was simply going there. She told me about this life where we couldn't do a lot of things. She told me about this divine healing. She told me about believing in God. She told me about trusting in God. I was in Georgia and my mother was in Michigan, and I made a trip. I got in the car and drove 14 hours by myself because I wanted to see what she was doing. And I never forget, if I could, I asked my mother, I said, "How do you feel?" And she said, your mother is sick. And I said, "No, how do you feel in your soul?" And for a brief second, my mother looked up from me from the bed, turned around. She said, "If I live or if I die, I'm going to trust God to the end." And she turned around. The next day, I packed my bags and came back to Georgia.
Mhm.
So they're preparing for it. You don't. You just got to trust and know what their lifestyle. The lifestyle speaks it all.
Ms. Director, any questions from
Not
our
at this
listeners?
moment.
Okay.
Not at this moment. Yes, sir.
And to our listening audience, question to you also. And Brother Russell, do children have a right to override their parents' wishes in divine healing matters?
Children don't have a right because everybody got their own rights. But I from what I've been experiencing and talking to different people who deal with divine healing, a lot of times it goes back to the question or the statement that I said earlier. They know if your mother let you talk about Brother Moon If your mother let you talk about the pastors, then no, I don't want her to believe in divine healing, because just because she got herself right at the end, I don't know that. You allowed us to do all this kind of stuff, so I don't know if that's really all you say it is. And then you got to remember, what are you feeding your children? My mother fed us. Even now, I eat a steady diet of those people who believed in divine healing. I just had a real close friend of mine pass, and her husband spoke at her funeral, and he told about how she was in pain, and how they was doing different things to her back that I'm not going to discuss. But I eat those stories, so that's what I believe. So I know about my mother, Deb. I know about Sister Niece up in Jackson when the church prayed and her stomach opened up. So you got to have a diet of divine healing. You can't have a diet of negative people in the church, because if that's what you're gonna eat, that's how the children are gonna dictate your death. They're gonna see that. My mother, I knew about the glory, I knew about the cloud, so I wanted her to experience all that.
Another question to our listeners and to Minister Russell. As a Church of God child, how do you see the Church of God today? The Church of God child, how do you see it today?
Man, I see the Church of God as a burning and bright light. The Church of God is a refuge for anybody who's sin sick. I wouldn't trade the Church of God for nothing in the world. I am a firm believer that that is the place to be. A lot of people want to have they might have different opinions, but I'm talking about for those who are really seeking help, and a time. See, a lot of people haven't got to the point where they need help. They want to do what they want to do, so they're gonna have negative. But God church is not the building. It's his people that I'm talking about. Even when you're talking about healing, Jesus said that's the children's bread. So don't try to override the children's bread. Don't the Church of God is a burning light. It's for those who live the lifestyle. Not, I don't expect all the children to be feel the same way I feel, because they ate bad diets. They ate stories of people who went back. They ate stories of people with doubt. They ate the stories of people with fears and unbelief. So if that's what they got a steady diet of, then it's not going to be bright. But I believe the Church of God is what God said it is, and there's nobody or nothing that can change my mind on that, for that question.
I have a question again to our listeners and viewers, and to Minister Russell. What could pastors do better in Church of God? What could we do better as a pastor in Church of God?
I feel like the pastors did what they thought was best. For me, and from what I see and what I think training is important. Only because I had some more training, and when I say training, I think far as the kids. You made a statement that there's no kids that are coming into the church. Well, if you're gonna have kids coming in church, you got to get them trained up on the usher board. They need to be trained in choir. They need to be trained in trustees. They need to be trained in ushering. They need to be trained in greeters. They need to be trained and not just have them not just a training, but they need to be not just sitting in church. But I'm not saying that they don't do this, because I don't know. I haven't been back to Michigan, but they need to have their own children's church, not where they just sitting down listening, but where they're operating and functioning under the capacity, not preaching or teaching, because they got to be, I understand being saved, but they need to know what it is to hold a door. They need to know what it is to count the money. They need to know how to do it. So if you're going to have a church, a future church, if all I do is come there and sit down and try to get the understanding of the word, flesh and blood can't reveal that to me. So I think training is important. And when God do open their minds up and they do get a revelation of what God is trying to get them to do, they'll have the training, and they'll be training for reigning.
All right.
Nice.
Very good. Very good.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned what pastor could do better. How about the young folks? What could they do better? what emphasis should they be focusing on as a young person in the Church of God?
A young person in the Church of God should be raising their hand, asking questions. A lot of times, young people don't know which way to go, so that's why training is important. The pastor's got to got to implement these things in place. And some of the people that you have might have problems. Might have Moses, for instance, had a speech problem. David he had his issues, and if you go, Paul had a thorn in his flesh. So these children might have issues, but if you're not training them, you can't grade them properly. And it might be somebody that God have in that house that he might be working with, and he might have favor in their life. But if you're not training and grading them, and let the person who's training them get back to the pastor with some type of observation and say, this person asked this question today in church, or they asked this question, and then you can elaborate on it. It got to come from both sides. It's not just the children, it's not just the pastor, but you got to create an environment where they can thrive and don't feel like they'll be ostracized by the questions they ask. And then the young people can start really looking forward and saying, hey, I felt like I was a part of something today. I just didn't come to church and sit down. I ushered. I counted the money. You know what? I might want to be a trustee at the church now. And then they'll feel like they can fill a position, and then they'll start looking, because on any job or anything you go to, once you get in there, you might be hired for one thing, but once you get in there, you be like, you know what? I'm in the hospital. I want to be in dietary. I might want to be a surgeon. I might just want to be a nurse. So same thing in the church. They got different positions, but it's all one body. So train them.
Very good. Director, any questions?
I do have a question from Larry Flew Ellen. He did ask, I guess he's going back to our discussion from a previous time from last week. And he wants to know, do you talk to those who left the church?
Do I talk to those that left the church?
Yes.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of people who left the church. I have a lot of friends there. I have a lot of family there. And people leave for different reasons. So yes, I do talk to them. Only thing you can do is offer advice to people. That's all you can do. It's simply not for me, but I just give you some water, some some water, some plant, but God get the increase at the end. So all you can do is just do your part.
He froze there for a moment, I believe. Can you hear, Pastor?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
You're talking to someone in the audience in the church. A decision was made, and that decision hurt them. Maybe not doctrinal, but something was decided, and that hurt them. What should that person do?
Well, anytime a person is hurt, they need to speak out, and because it's important. It's very important. The reason why I say speaking out is important, because hurt people hurt people. Yeah, hurt people. So if they stay quiet, they'll wind up hurting somebody else, because that, you got to speak out. You got to, and the buddy system is real powerful. Not just a buddy system of people who might be quote unquote in the upper echelon of church, but have somebody that you got confidence in their lifestyle and say, hey, I've been hurt. I've been, what was said to me, it rubbed me the wrong way. And that person, and you'll know when it's God, because that person will always extend an olive branch of love. So, yeah.
Last week, you gave an interesting metaphor about the table. Can you reiterate that, please?
About the table. The table was actually a scenario. The table was, I had a friend of mine who had a young man, a young son, and she left her keys on the table, and she told her son, he was a younger child, I think he was around 3 or 4, or maybe 4 or 5, somewhere in there, but I can't remember. But she said, hey, go get my keys. And he walked over to the table and turned around and came back, and he said, what keys? And she said, right there, go get my keys and quit playing, boy. And he went back and came back and said, I don't see the keys. And she said, "Oh, just get out the way. Go upstairs. Go to your room," or whatever she told. She got him out of there. And before she went and got the keys, some told her to get on her knees. And she got down on his level and walked over to the table, and she realized she couldn't see him either. So what I got out of that is sometimes you have to get down on people's level, because some of the stuff that you could see spiritually, and it was ironic that she got on her knees, because sometimes when you get on your knees, God can reveal stuff to you that you just couldn't see regular. And I always, and when I speak, I still use that in different places, because there are people that are hurting in the church. There are people that are wounded. There are people that have been broken. There are people have been, and you don't know what it takes to break a person's mind, where yours might be strong. But if you get on your knees and get down on their level and look at life from where they see it, man, you'll come to realize you don't see it either.
Very good. And also, any calls for us, Director?
Not at the moment. No.
And also last week, our time is just about up again.
Wow.
Anyway, last week, also another metaphor. It's about the fire and the smoke. Discuss the fire and the smoke.
Well, the fire is the thing that actually burns, that moves people. Fire is just like COVID or anything else. You respect it, but you don't have to be afraid of it. You got to respect fire. In its proper place, it can be used as a wonderful thing, but in the wrong place, it can be damaged. Now, when I was speaking about last week, was people was burned and smoke in the smoke damage. When you have smoke damage, a lot of people they inhaled a lot of toxic fumes. When something is burning, it might be paint in that house. It might be lead-based paint. It could be cotton, which you sit on something nice and comfortable. But when it's in an infernal fire, it could just be a simple song. It could be a testimony. It could be somebody who you normally sit comfortable with. But when it's on fire, it could be, when it's ingested, it can hurt somebody. It can be dangerous to them. So the thing is, you got to be real careful with people who inhale different things, and you got to be real patient. One thing Jesus said, he left with us more than anything. He said, have love for one another. That's as simple as not me, but I can just give you what he said. And a lot of people are burned and nobody's giving them love.
Lord help us. Is there a question?
Well, I have a comment from Tom Wingate. He said, if I have come to the conclusion that I can't worry about the divisions, pastors, groups, etc. anymore, who am I? So therefore, I take confidence in the scripture that Jesus makes it personal when he said in Revelation 3:20-22, if any man, to him that overcometh, not the group, the church, or the congregation, he or the individual that hath an ear, let him hear. Is his comment.
Any comments on that, Brother Jeff?
I agree totally, man. When you've been church hurt and you've been dealing with things, only thing you can do is overcome. You got to press in. It's a pressing way.
It's true.
We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. I can't say that enough. You got to press in. But one thing I will say is that God will not test you above what he's willing to bless you. A lot of people want little tests, but big blessings. But I tell people all the time, big blessings, big tests. Little tests, little blessings.
Friends, our time is just about up. This podcast is by Church of God people, for Church of God people. We've all been affected to some extent, and we're all involved to some extent. So let's all do our part to find ways to implement and sustain forgiveness, healing, reconciliation. Years ago, I was counseling in a certain place. A young lady, she was there. It was off hours, and we were just donating our time, so to speak. And she had cancer, but it was pretty controlled, according to the surgeon who I did talk to. But it took off and ate her body up after a while. And the surgeon wondered why. Come to find out, her boyfriend went out on her, and she found out about it. And she would not forgive him. And that made the cancer advanced. I mean, in a real aggressive way. What we learned from that, the surgeon and I, is that where there's no forgiveness, there's no healing. They work together. And so let's all do our part to push the envelope in those three areas. Friends, next week, we're going to have a guest, Tabitha W. Edwards, 2 bachelor's degrees. She's an accountant. She's a mom, wife. Discuss her story about how she was hurt in the church, had opposition, but how she recovered. We want to discuss these things and how people got past it and went on to serve God. These sensitive topics we discuss because we got to understand how they occurred so they won't happen again. Rudyard Kipling, of course, was an author. He wrote Jungle Book, British born, and his main focus was, if it's not settled, it's not settled. So we want to thank our staff, Sister Linda Holmes, Lolita Williams, our director, Tennille, and our special guest, Thomas J. Russell. May the Lord bless you. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. May God guide you and direct you. Amen.
Amen. Amen.